Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun
Mantra Guru Jota Shikha Guru Gon Tar Chorane Age Koriya Bandhan Vancha Kalpa Turubya Ashtakrupa Sindhuba Eva Chapati Tanam Pabanebo Vaishnam Eva Namo Namaha Om Agyana Timananda Sagyanan Juna Shkalakaya Chukshush Unmilitang Jana Tasma Sri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Te Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunnavadi Paschata Desha Tarine Srila Prabhupada Ki. In our previous studies of Bhagavad Gita, we discovered that Srimad Bhagavad Gita is divided into three portions. Chapters 1 to 6 dealing with Karma Yoga, chapters 7 to 12 dealing with Bhakti Yoga, and chapters 13 to 18 dealing with Jnana Yoga. We've discussed the first 6 chapters, Karma Yoga, and chapters 7 to 12 dealing with Bhakti Yoga. Prabhupada said that the beginning portion and the final portion were like coverings to the more confidential teachings of Bhakti Yoga in chapters 7 to 12. Today we're beginning our study of the final portion of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapters 13 to 18. We'll be covering chapters 13 to 18 in 5 lessons. As you can see, each lesson will be dealing with one of the respective chapters. The first lesson, which we'll be beginning shortly, will be chapters 13 and 14. And lesson 2, the banyan tree, in Purushottam Yoga, that's chapter 15. Lesson 3, divine and demoniac natures, is chapter 16. Lesson 7, divisions of faith, chapter 17. And surrender to Krishna, we'll be examining in our study of the final chapter of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18. In the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, which Prabhupada translates as nature, enjoyer, and consciousness, Krishna examines these 3 objects, the Purusha, the Prakriti, and the Kshetragya, in great detail, and as deep analysis of how they're related to each other. All of that information is provided in the student study material of the Bhakti Sastri course. And we encourage you to read that material on your own and in that way study the 13th chapter. We won't go into an elaborate analysis of the sections of the 13th chapter. That's clearly explained in the student's material and you can read on your own. We will make some mentions to the 13th chapter as we explore the 14th chapter. So let's begin with text number 1 of the 14th chapter. Sri Bhagavan Vacha Param Bhuya Prabhakshami Jnananam Jnanam Uttamam Yadgatva Munaya Sarve Parang Shidhim Itogati. That the Supreme Personality of Godhead said that Param Bhuya Prabhakshami Jnananam Jnanam Uttamam. I shall now declare to you the supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge. Yadgyatva, knowing which Munayo Sarve, all the sages, Param Siddhim Itogati, have attained the supreme perfection. Just reading the translation of the verse. Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport to text number 1 of chapter 14. From the 7th chapter to the end of the 12th chapter, Sri Krishna in detail reveals the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now the Lord Himself is further enlightening Arjuna. If one understands this chapter through the process of philosophical speculation, he will come to an understanding of devotional service. When we studied the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, which concluded with Krishna's statement that Yoginam api sarvesham madgatena antaratmana. Of all of the yogis, the yogi who madgatena, who abides by me, antaratmana, deep within his heart, Sradavan bhajate joman, and with great devotion worships me, glorifies me, hears about me, performs bhakti yoga to me. Same jukta uttam mata. He is the jukta uttam, the most connected, the most intimately connected with me in yoga, or as Prabhupada translates, the highest yogi. So those first 6 chapters actually were explaining, as we've examined, these first 6 chapters are dealing with karma yoga. So ultimately Krishna is explaining that the whole purpose and the whole objective and the final conclusion of karma yoga is to come to the point of Sradavan bhajate jomam. As the different steps of the yoga ladder, the different rungs of the yoga ladder which we examined, and the different types of yoga systems. And the general overview of karma as one goes through the prescribed duties of varnashram dharma, and then karma sannyas, and then jnana, meditation. He comes to the ultimate point of realizing the super soul in the heart and beginning devotional service. So in this way, this is the ultimate goal of karma yoga, is to come to bhakti. And so similarly, Prabhupada's explaining in this purport that we'll be examining, Krishna will present in these final 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will present how through the process of, as Prabhupada says in the purport, Prabhupada says philosophical speculation. Specifically what that means in this connection is analysis and discussion in relation to the 3 modes of material nature. That's what Prabhupada's referring to by philosophical speculation. So we'll see that by this process of analyzing the 3 modes of material nature, what is their nature, what is their functioning, what is their purpose, what is their cause, etc., what is the effect that they have on the conditioned soul, what is the effect that they have on the supreme soul, etc. All of this will be analyzed. And in that way, as Prabhupada said, one will come to an understanding of devotional service. Just as the first 6 chapters dealing with all the different types of yoga and yoga processes brought us to the conclusion that bhakti yoga is the highest. So similarly, this study and this analysis of the 3 modes of material nature given by Sri Krishna himself in chapters 13 to 17 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 18 being a summary, 13 to 17, will actually be in detailed analysis of the 3 modes of material nature with the objective of deepening and consolidating and helping us to come to the full surrender of Krishna in Bhakti Yoga, which is the ultimate conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. Let's take a look at the overview of chapters 13 and 14. Verses 1 to 7, Kshetra Kshetragya, the field and the knower of the field, Krishna explains. And then Gyan, verses 8 to 12. Actually, this was also elaborately discussed in the Sri Ishopanishad mantra 12, the Vidya and the Avidya, and knowing both together. Prabhupada quoted from this section of Bhagavad Gita in his analysis of that portion of Sri Ishopanishad. This being the process of real knowledge and the items that constitute real knowledge according to Etad Jnanamiti Proktam. Krishna explains that this is knowledge according to what I proclaim in those verses. The object of knowledge, Prakriti, Purusha and their union, verses 20 to 26, we'll be looking at that to some degree in the discussion on the 14th chapter, which will be beginning shortly. Jnana Chakshush, the vision of knowledge, verses 27 to 35. And then in chapter 4, again, we're looking at the scientific analysis of the relationship between the jiva and the material energy and the Lord, those 3 things combined together. And this 14th chapter is explaining how the eternal living entity gets born into the material energy, and then how the modes of material nature condition the characteristics of those modes, how they act, the results of death in the modes, and then transcending the modes. These are the topics we'll be looking at today in the first lesson. Prabhupada writes in the purport to text 1 of chapter 14, it has also been explained that it is due to association with the modes of nature that the living entity is entangled in the material world. Now, in this chapter, the Supreme Personality of Godhead explains what those modes of nature are, how they act, how they bind, and how they give liberation. So Prabhupada is referring to, it has also been explained. Prabhupada is referring to there when he says this, paraphrasing, due to association with the modes of material nature, the living entity is entangled in the material world. So Prabhupada is paraphrasing here text number 22 of chapter 13, which we will examine. Purusha prakriti shto hi. Krishna's explaining, he's examining, he's describing the position of the living entity that is in the material world. Purusha, the living entity, prakriti shto, who's situated in matter, prakriti shto, situated in the material nature, in other words, a conditioned soul in the material world. Bhunkte prakriti jan gunan. He enjoys the gunan. Bhunkte gunan. He's actually enjoying the modes of material nature, which are prakriti jan, which are born of that prakriti. So you can see the analysis that it's like a flow chart of concepts that Krishna is speaking. Prabhakshami. Now prakriti shto, purusha prakriti shto, when the living entity is situated in matter, bhunkte prakriti jan gunan. He bhunkte gunan, he enjoys the modes of material nature which are found in that prakriti, which the living entity is situated in. The prakriti is comprised of prakriti jan gunan. The prakriti, the material nature, material modes, they function within that prakriti. If you click on your desktop, if you click on prakriti, you'll see, boom, 3 modes come up. And their interaction and their functioning, that actually constitutes what we call the material energy. Material energy. So the prakriti jan, they produced the prakriti jan gunan, the material modes, the 3 modes of material nature are the product of the prakriti, are the prakriti. So Krishna is explaining that as a result of that guna sangha, associating with the gunas, guna sangha. And why are we associating with the gunas? We're enjoying those gunas. And we'll discuss shortly examples of how we're enjoying sattva guna, how we're enjoying rajaguna, how we're enjoying tamaguna. And in this way, that is bhunkte gunan. That's what we're here in the material nature for. That's why we're here. Our enjoying propensity, which actually is meant for service, by serving the enjoyment of the Supreme Lord, Sri Hari, by serving his enjoyment, that actually we enjoy. But having Krishna Buli, having forgotten our actual position as Krishna's servant, say jiva anadir bahirmukha. We become bahirmukha. We become merged into, we become absorbed into this material energy. Nitai na bolilo mukhe, majilo shangsha shukhe. We actually are happy in the material nature in complete forgetfulness of our relationship with Krishna. Say sambandha nahi ja. Nitai na bolilo mukhe, majilo shangsha shukhe. We're not serving the Sri Lord Hari by chanting his holy name. We're instead of in tasting that enjoyment, seva shukarash, or the Shegurashe maji amukhi bolo hari hari, the sweetness of chanting the holy name, we're enjoying the sweetness of the modes of material nature and the pleasure that they can provide the soul in their varieties and in their respective combinations. And in that way, we're associating with the modes. We're enjoying the modes. We're enjoying sattvagun, we're enjoying rajagun, we're enjoying tamagun. And in that way, we're associating with the modes. And karana guna sangha, because of that association with the modes, sadasad yoni janmasha, we take birth again and again. As Prabhupada translates in the next text number 5 of the 14th chapter, Sattam Raja Tama Iti Guna Prakriti Sambhava. As we mentioned, Guna Prakriti Sambhava. The material nature, it produces the 3 modes. Guna Prakriti Sambhava. And those 3 modes are Sattam Raja Tama Iti. In fact, this is the first time in Bhagavad Gita that we're actually hearing the term Sattam Raja Tama. Up to this point, we've been hearing of the material nature in a generic way. Mama Maya, or the Prakriti, or as Krishna said in the previous verses, the In second chapter, Krishna mentions Triguna Vishayabhed. He mentions the Triguna, he mentions the three modes. Nistriguna Bhavajuna. He refers to them in the second chapter in a generic way, Triguna. But here is the first time actually that they are respectively mentioned. Sattvam, Raja, Tama. And these are Prakriti Sambhava. These are born of the material nature. If you, on your desktop, if you click on that Prakriti file, boom, it opens up 3 new files. Sattvam, Raja, Tama. They are Guna Prakriti Sambhava. They are produced from the Prakriti. Nibadnanti Mahabaho Dehi Dehinam Abhyayam. And even though the living entity is Abhyay, it is, a living entity is eternal. Abhyay. It never ends. Nibadnanti. Nibadnanti. There's, you can see in English the word which resembles the badnanti, the bondage. Nibadnanti, Prabhupada translates conditioned. What does that actually mean? That means that even though the abhyay, even though the jiva is the same quality as Sri Hari, full of knowledge, full of bliss, eternal, that eternality, that spiritual nature of the living entity becomes covered over due to forgetfulness. We accept the conditions. We become conditioned by the material energy. Because of associating with the material energy by enjoying the material nature, enjoying the modes of material nature, we're associated, we have accepted the conditions of the material nature, and therefore we become illusion, thinking that we are a product of matter. I am this body, and death is the ultimate end, and all of these bodily. This is nibadnanti. This is like a disease condition that we're now suffering the symptoms of as a result of our attraction to enjoying the taste and the enjoyment which is provided in the modes of material nature. As a result of enjoying that, this is the result. We become conditioned, and we think we are a product of matter. So this is very interesting scientific analysis that Krishna is entering into here. Actually, this is what we should have been studying in school. We should have been studying this in school when we were young, when we were just learning about science. We should have been studying this science. But in any case, even though we've taken the Krishna consciousness later in life, still better late than never, and we would encourage you to teach others this science of Krishna consciousness that Krishna has so wonderfully and so munificently provided for all of humanity, and Srila Prabhupada has so clearly and so devotionally and so with such enlightenment, Prabhupada is explaining these teachings of Bhagavad Gita. So we encourage you to enlighten the young people in these teachings to whatever capacity you have, to whatever extent you can. And that can have a tremendous effect if you can train someone in the science of God consciousness early in their life, how they can perfect their lives. So Prabhupada makes a comment in the purport to text 7 that actually the mode of passion is a particularly prominent influence in modern society. In order to please his wife, children and society, and to keep up his prestige, one has to work. Therefore, the whole material world is more or less in the mode of passion. Modern civilization is considered to be advanced in the standard and the mode of passion. Formerly, the advanced condition was considered to be in the mode of goodness. That's an extremely deep statement that Srila Prabhupada makes there. He makes it in such a relaxed way, it just rolls off his tongue. But it is such a prevalent reality that we face in modern life, that previously the values of sattva gun, samadhamma tapa soksham shantir ajavam evacha jnanam vijnanam ashtikyam jnana karma sabhavakam jnana karma sabhavakam, the qualities of a brahmana, sama, dhamma, tapa, socham, these values are not at all appreciated in the modern world. Sama, steadiness of mind. Who cares? People, steadiness of mind is not something that people. Sama, dhamma, sense control. There's the whole opposite. We're encouraged to allow the senses to express and to be activated and fully functioning according to their own free desire. And this philosophy is there. Some tapa, austerity. When you're applying for a job, does the prospective employee, does the interviewer ask, what different types of tapasya do you practice in your life? Of course, no one cares about this. Tapa. Socham, cleanliness. When you're applying for a job, do they ask you, how often do you take bath? But these are actually the virtues of the sattva gun. But in the modern world, these things are not considered important. It's so difficult to find water. When a Brahmana cannot live without water. But in the modern environment, it's so difficult to get fresh water. Find a tap of water somewhere in a shopping centre. Very difficult. Because these things, people just eat and then they just interact. They don't even wash. Eat. They're just eating all the time. So many of these things. Or the cleanliness, the standards of cleanliness when it comes to prasada. Not to touch the plate with the spoon. That not the utensils that are eaten from, not to even take them back into the kitchen. So all of this is degrading, and rather than the mode of good values in the mode of goodness, what in modern society is valued is success, material success, victory, power, person ambitious, a person who's successful, who reaches a high position, a wealthy person. All these things are products of the mode of passion. These are all temporary achievements which are achieved at the result of great effort in manipulating the material energy, rajagun, and the values of the mode of goodness, of internal purification, development of self-knowledge, cleanliness, development of qualities of austerity, of purity. These things are not appreciated, valued, or rewarded in the modern society. So much we're influenced by the mode of passion, as Prabhupada clearly describes in his analysis. So these verses 6 to 18, describe various aspects of the modes of material nature, how they condition, different characteristics of the modes of material nature, destination at death of a person who's affected by the modes of material nature, and results of action in. Krishna explains in the 13th chapter, Prakriti, Purusha Prakriti Shto Bhunkte Prakriti Jan Gunan, that the living entity in the material nature is enjoying the modes of material nature. So, as we go through these verses, we can cite examples of how the living entity is enjoying the different modes of material nature, and thus karanam gunasanga, associating with the modes, sadasad yoni janama, and again in this way conditioning themselves to repeated birth and death in this world. Let's take a look at text number 6. O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions. Those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. Now, in the purport, Prabhupada comments that the difficulty here is that when a living entity is situated in the mode of goodness, he becomes conditioned to feel that he is advanced in knowledge and is better than others. In this way, he becomes conditioned. We can see, Krishna explains in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, texts 40 and 41, that Yatad Agre Vishameva Pariname Amritopamam, that in the beginning, the practice of austerity, Yatad Agre Vishameva, can be very like poison. Pariname Amritopamam, but then after some time one enjoys a great pleasure, pleasure in the mode of goodness, by rising early in the morning, by taking bath, by practicing austerity, tapasya. There is a pleasure that one enjoys. In the beginning it may be a little bitter, but it becomes very pleasurable practicing these types of austerities. Atma buddhi prasadajam tat sukham sattvikam proktam. This is happiness in the mode of goodness, the awakening of one's consciousness, the serving the Lord, the acquiring knowledge, the advancing and expanding one's consciousness. This gives them a type of happiness, and this is happiness in the mode of goodness. So what one may be enjoying his elevated position in this material world, being elevated in knowledge, being elevated in consciousness, and being able to see the world in a perspective of great wisdom, one enjoys this position of elevation as he's experiencing and interacting with this world. And in this way becomes conditioned by the mode of goodness, the happiness that it provides. Text number 7. The mode of passion is born of unlimited desire and longing, O son of Kunti, and because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to material fruitive actions. So, in the mode of passion, one has desires, and one wants to fulfill those desires, and one has to work in a fruitive way, in a result-oriented way, to achieve one's objectives. Very much objective-orientated, achieving the goals. This is the mode of passion. It requires, it will induce one to get active. In the mode of goodness, one has knowledge, and one is satam sanjayata jnanam. In the mode of goodness, one has knowledge, and one understands that even if I endeavor and try to achieve those goals, it doesn't actually, unless they're spiritual goals, we're talking about material, then actually that doesn't actually increase my quality of existence. So no need to endeavor for those things. In mode of goodness, a person has gyan and is peaceful, is satisfied, and therefore can live a very peaceful life, and doesn't have to be as active as those in the mode of passion who are dependent upon achieving the results in order to enjoy. Mode of passion means a desire to achieve something. I'm dependent on achieving that for enjoyment. I work hard to achieve it. That is mode of passion. Mode of goodness is that let me just be satisfied with the circumstances I'm in and try my best to please the Lord. And one is happy, one is satisfied in a different way. So in this way one becomes conditioned by the mode of passion. Text number 8. O Bharat, know that the mode of darkness, born of ignorance and delusion of all embodied living beings. Thus, the results of this mode of madness, indolence, and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. So the sattvic sage, he is peaceful and satisfied with the circumstances as they are. The rajasic, fruitive worker, has so many desires, are very clear, and so many goals wants to fulfill and to achieve, and is very, very busy and enjoys progressing towards achieving those goals. And is that way bound up. And the person who's predominantly influenced by the mode of ignorance, they don't really care. They don't really think about it. They just absorb their mind in temporary useless things, cinema, song, intoxication, sports, events. And in this way, just satisfying the senses becomes their main preoccupation, and they enjoy in that way. The mode of ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. As Krishna is explaining here, the way we enjoy, how the modes of material nature, how the living entity actually enjoys. And therefore, when we find when we're in the effort to awaken people, sleeping, just like Mahaprabhu's mission, Jeev jago gauda chandra bole, kota nidra jayo, maya pishachire bole. This maya illusion, kota nidra, how long you will remain in this, under the illusion of this material bewilderment. Jeev jago, Mahaprabhu Jeev. He's saying jago means get up, wake up, jago, wake up. To understand that you're transcendental to this material world and that you're the eternal part and parcel of Sri Hari, his eternal servant, and begin to act and function in that way. But to awaken the conditioned souls is not an easy task, because actually they're happy. They're enjoying their attachment and their bondage in this material world. They're enjoying them, and Krishna will explain, this is the next verse. Tasmat rajas tamas chabi bhuya sattam bhavati bharata. That rajas tamas chabi bhuya sattam bhavati. Sometimes overwhelming raja and tama sattam bhavati. The material mode of goodness becomes the strongest. So everyone at some time in their life feels some sense of righteousness, goodness. I'll do some charity, I'll do some selfless work, I'll clean this, I'll do some duty, without desire, not for any immediate result, just doing it because it's my duty. That's the mode of goodness. And everyone at some time in their life, they feel inspired, and so sometimes the mode of goodness becomes stronger in everybody. Rajas Sattvam Tami Bhuya. And then sometimes the mode of passion becomes predominant. And even for the aspiring saintly, still there are occasions, Rajas Sattvam Tami Bhuya, the mode of passion overwhelms. And one wants to eat something, one wants to do something, one wants to go for a ride, something. So in this way one becomes victimized by the influence of the mode of passion. And then Tama Sattvam Rajas Tata. Sometimes the mode of ignorance, and we just, deadlines that have to be met, meetings, responsibilities, we just forget about them, we just let it slip off the agenda, and we just completely forget about it. Or we just merge into some movie or whatever, and sleep and dream, and in that way the mode of ignorance sometimes becomes predominant. And basically this is the existence of the as Krishna, we'll read the translation. Sometimes the mode of goodness becomes predominant, defeating passion and ignorance. O son of Bharat, sometimes the mode of passion defeats goodness and ignorance, and at other times ignorance defeats goodness and passion. And in this way there's always competition for supremacy. So that means that the living entity is simply overwhelmed. And competition for supremacy can be understood that supremacy in terms of what I'm going to take shelter of. Okay, I'll take shelter of goodness. Okay, I'll take shelter of passion. Okay, I'll take shelter of ignorance. So one becomes supreme, and there's a competition, and the living entity has to be under the influence of either one or the other, or the combination. And in this way, the living entity always surrenders to one or other of the supreme pushings of the modes of material nature. And this is life in the material world. Now, according to one's situation under the modes of material nature, there's different symptoms. 11 verses 11 to 13 are explaining the characteristics and symptoms which are helpful for us, because it can help us recognize the modes which are predominantly influencing us. Yes, we may not have actually realized, but we're influenced by these modes of material nature. Even though we may be chanting Hare Krishna, we're still very much influenced by these modes of material nature. And for our benefit, Krishna here, he explains some examples how we can identify the symptoms to help us identify the respective modes that are influencing us. Text 11, the manifestation of the mode of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illumined by knowledge. O chief of Bharat, when there is an increase in the mode of passion, the symptoms of great attachment, fruitive activity, intense endeavor, uncontrollable desire, and hankering develop. So these are symptoms that can help us recognize the influence of the mode of passion. There is a great attachment. A person is very much attached to something, and it would be very painful and difficult for that person to give that thing up. This is influence of mode of passion. Intense endeavor. We can see the materialistic people, for most of their time, every day, rising early in the morning, they're just thinking, they're getting everything together, breakfast, into the commuting, into the office or the place of work. And they work all day. So this is a great endeavor. When you consider one's quality of life, how much time in our life are we working just to feed the body and maintain the status of the material circumstances, how much effort we have to put into that. On the spiritual path, actually, a person should reduce that. Ultimately, the Varnashram system supports this in its encouragement of renunciation. Why one is encouraged to move on from the Grihastha life to the Vanaprastha life to the Sannyas life. Because in those respective ashrams, one will be facilitated with the ability to spend less time maintaining the body. And in the sannyas ashram, the sannyasi can be completely unconcerned with maintaining his body. And that will be provided by the assistance of the sannyasi. This is the Varnashram system. So that a person can completely remove themselves from the mode of passion and can become completely absorbed. And we should analyze our life and see how much time, how much work, how much endeavor I'm running around just to make sure that the meals are coming and my accommodation is maintained. Most people, basically, it's like a useless cycle, because they're just maintaining themselves to be maintained so they can maintain themselves. and their quality of life. For what? Their quality of life, there's so little time for them to actually have a deep quality of life that the whole thing is pointless. But the mode of ignorance kicks in. The mode of ignorance kicks in, and we think, well, it doesn't really matter because everyone else is doing that anyway. And we don't think anything more about it because we're influenced by the mode of ignorance. As Krishna says in the next verse, when there's an increase in the mode of ignorance, darkness, inertia, madness, illusion are manifest. So we just don't care that we're living a life which is completely pointless, and we're investing so much energy just to provide meals and accommodation just so we can keep alive, so we can keep... For what? It's pointless. But we never wake up to see that because we don't care, because we're in the mode of ignorance, because everyone else is bewildered like that and it doesn't really matter. Let's just go and have some entertainment and forget about it for a while. Now, verses 14 to 15, Krishna explains the results. The results, a death of a person according to one's respective influence circumstantially of the modes of material nature. How you're influenced at the time of death. Let me just cut all that. No, it's like such a rambling of useless words. In verses 14 to 15, Krishna explains the respective destinations one will achieve according to the influence of the modes of material nature at the time of death. Text number 14. When one dies in the mode of goodness, he attains the pure, higher planets of the great sages. That means one will be elevated higher than the earth to the Svarga or to the Janaloka, Siddhaloka planetary systems. When one dies in the mode of passion, he takes birth among those engaged in fruitive activities. And when one dies in the mode of ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom. So in this way, as Krishna confirms in text number 18, Udvam gachanti sattva sto. If you're situated in the mode of goodness, gachanti sattva udvam gachanti, you will be elevated. Sattva sto, being situated in the mode of goodness, you're going up. You're going up in this life, you're being elevated to a more and more liberated position where you're less and less restricted by the common experiences of material life, and you're elevated from that, and so much freedom is given. You remain in the mode of goodness, you'll be elevated and elevated to the transcendental level. Udvam gachanti sattva sto. Therefore, maintaining the mode of goodness is such an essential component of the life of devotion. One has to be clean, one has to control the mind, one has to control the senses. And in this way one remains in the mode of goodness, and one udvam gachanti is elevated to higher and higher positions of consciousness. Madhye tishtanti rajasi. And one is influenced by the mode of passion, he will remain in this middle planetary environment, as was mentioned. And jagannaguna pritishto adho gachanti tamasaha. If one is influenced by the mode of ignorance, and therefore he can become degraded to a lower planet, or mudho yoni shu jayate. In text number 15, Krishna says mudho yoni shu can take birth in the body of an animal. In verses 16 and 17, Srila Prabhupada writes very powerfully, revealing his mission to deliver the world from the effect of the lower modes of material nature. Let's read some of these comments Srila Prabhupada writes. Because people have no education in actual knowledge, they become irresponsible. To stop this irresponsibility, education for developing the mode of goodness of the people in general must be there. When we examine the behavior of the common person in this regard, we can see that such irresponsibility has become such a standard of behavior among the common man. Just like, for example, you can go into the supermarket and you can see all of the different aisles are there, and you'll come to one aisle, they'll call that frozen goods. So you can go through it'll be fruit and veg, and there'll be cauliflowers, there'll be zucchini, there'll be jackfruit, there'll be mangoes, there'll be raspberries. And fruit and veg, these are eatables. And you can find the rice and the legumes, the beans and the nuts and all of these things, and the bread. And then next shelf, you'll see the frozen goods. There may be the dairy, the cheese, the yogurt, milk. And then next up, there'll be all the body parts, all sewn up and put in plastic. And there's no here. This is natural things that God has provided for humanity. And here is our slaughter and our exploitation and our violence on the innocent creatures. But we just kind of don't see it in a completely indiscriminate way. This is food, that's food, you take it, you buy. This is ignorance. This is ignorance. This is an example of a society that's degraded. The people don't protest. Why are you putting these dead bodies right next to the food? Because the people they're in ignorance, and they think that eating the body parts and eating the bread are the same. They don't discriminate. They can't see any difference with that. That means that they become blind. Of course there's difference. You have to open your eyes. When you eat the bread, the grains, they grow in the sun. They grow for 3 months. Here we live in Bengal. We're surrounded by rice fields. You see the rice. It grows after 3 months. It's green. It's beautiful green. It's a green color all through Bengal. Twice a year, rice is growing. And then for the green green fields, you see a week they harvest it. They become ripe and they go a little yellow on the top. It bends. Actually, the plant has died. The plant has died at that time. And then the heads mature. The seed of the plant, as the seed of the plant is harvested, the grain from that, the plant is already dead. So then, and similarly, fruits, and milk, there's no killing, the cow is giving milk. So that food is different from the food where you're growing the animals in very painful and very violent circumstances, just growing them for the purpose of killing them and eating them. And these farms, these were the chickens farms and all of these poultry farms and all this abuse, this terrible violence, and the cows, and they're lined up, and thousands are being killed and slaughtered and shot. And so this is, you have to become sensitive to see. But the modern society, they don't see anything wrong with that. And in fact, if you're on the plane, a special meal, a vegetarian, how unusual. It's a special meal. Because in general, the people are completely degraded to this level. They don't see any difference between eating bread and eating the flesh of an animal. So this is the predicament. And Prabhupada is explaining that they're irresponsible as a result of lacking knowledge. So they have to be educated. And when one's educated, eyes open up. One sees the whole reality completely different. This is Prabhupada's mission. This is Mahaprabhu's mission. Prati gore gore gi koro e bika bhaja Krishna koro Krishna bolo Krishna shikha savatra amaraga koro ho prakash shunu shunu nityananda shunu haridas. To awaken every man in every home into his understanding his actual position in relation to the Lord and the real responsibility that he has in this human form of life. Prabhupada continues, even if the majority of the people aren't happy and prosperous, if a certain percentage of the population develop Krishna consciousness and become situated in the mode of goodness, then there is possibility for peace and prosperity all over the world. It's so encouraging, Prabhupada's statement here. It's not that last night someone asked me in a class about, well, we can't expect everyone to practice Krishna consciousness. We can't expect, and we won't have an environment where everyone's practicing Krishna consciousness. So that would be the spiritual world. So actually, if a certain number of people become awakened into their actual understanding their relationship with Sri Hari and living a life in harmony with their responsibility of serving Sri Hari and enlightening others, a small number of people that can have an effect on bringing peace and prosperity for the whole of the planet. This is Srila Prabhupada's mission. So become part of this mission if you're not part of it already. What a glorious mission, which will generate peace and prosperity for the whole planet if you just become pure in your Krishna consciousness. That's Prabhupada's mission for us. In text number 16, Srila Prabhupada writes, the present human civilization is of course grossly misled by the modes of passion and ignorance. It is a very dangerous age, and all nations should take care to provide the easiest process, Krishna consciousness, to save humanity from the greatest danger. Srila Prabhupada ki. These are some of the treasures that we find when we undertake a systematic study of Srila Prabhupada's books. Statements like this, which we can actually devote our whole life to help to fulfill. All nations should take care to provide the easiest process, Krishna consciousness, to save the humanity from the greatest danger. In text number 10 of the 14th chapter, Srila Prabhupada is explaining some of the fundamental steps required for us to progress on the path of liberation from the influence of the modes of material nature. Let's examine some of Prabhupada's comments. The prominence of some certain mode of nature is manifested in one's dealings, in his activities, in eating, etc. But if one wants, he can develop by practice the mode of goodness and thus defeat the mode of ignorance and passion. If one is determined, he can be blessed by the mode of goodness, and by transcending the mode of goodness, he can be situated in pure goodness. So as Prabhupada is explaining here, that even though the material mode of goodness is a material mode of nature, the aspiring sadhaka should aspire to elevate oneself, to situate oneself in the mode of goodness. And that is the most conducive position for awakening one's Krishna consciousness, as we've been discussing. So in terms of our interaction with the material energy, we should try to, as much as possible, reduce the passionate and tamasic interactions and to increase the interaction with the material nature in the mode of goodness. And as much as possible, immerse our life in sattvic activity, and in that way it will be conducive for us to sustain our Krishna consciousness. It will be very easy for us to sustain our Krishna consciousness. And extensive interaction with the material nature functioning through the Raja and Tamagun, if that's done in an extensive way, then there can be major upsets and obstacles in our progress in spiritual life. So in this way, we need to reduce the Rajasic and Tamasic behavior and increase the Sattvic behavior. Krishna explains ultimately in text number 26, Mam cha yo vyabhacharena bhakti yogena shevate. Shagunan samatitaitam brahmabhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and comes to the level of Brahman. So the simple process of Krishna consciousness, of serving Sri Hari, of remembering Sri Hari, of chanting the names and glories of Sri Hari, of hearing about Sri Hari, of serving the mission of Sri Hari, serving the followers, serving the Vaishnavas, Tarera Charan Shevi, Bhakta Shonebash, Janame hoy ei avilash, as Narottam Das Thakur sings, to live with the Vaishnavas who are engaged in the service of the Goswamis. This is my only desire, life after life. So in this way one remains in Krishna consciousness and remains in the mode of goodness and transcends the modes of material nature. Prabhupada comments in lecturing in 1968, the Krishna consciousness movement is directly offering the spiritual platform, which is above the mode of goodness. The quality of goodness will automatically be there. Any person who is in Krishna consciousness, his quality of goodness, namely he doesn't indulge in illicit sex, he doesn't smoke or even take tea or coffee even, he doesn't eat any forbidden foodstuff, neither he takes part in unnecessarily gambling, so good character is immediately there. And to conclude our study of the 14th chapter, Srila Prabhupada comments in text number 1, by understanding this knowledge, various great sages attained perfection and transferred to the spiritual world. The Lord now explains the same knowledge in a better way. This knowledge is far, far superior to all other processes of knowledge thus far explained. And knowing this, many attain perfection. Thus it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.